Hello and welcome to episode 116 of the Meet the Farmers podcast. I'm your host, Ben Eagle. And now I'm really pleased to say that this is the first episode of a short series of 4 podcast episodes that's being produced in collaboration with the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission. And it's all about linking different voices in the food supply chain. So over the next 4 weeks, we'll be discussing a range of topics, all related to linking consumers and producers as much as possible. Today, we're talking about the chefs and bakers who grow their own produce and sell it direct to customers. Why producer own, though? What are the economics behind it? And how likely is it that more chefs will be doing this in the future? To discuss all this and more, I'm joined by Henrietta Inman, a baker from Wakelyns in Suffolk, Ethan Friskney-Bryer from the Fitzroy restaurant in Cornwall, and Charlie Buchanan-Smith from the Free Company just outside of Edinburgh. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for coming on. I've given a very brief introduction to all of you, but I wonder if you can all introduce yourselves first of all and tell the listeners about what you do and why you do it. Henrietta, do you want to start?
Okay. Thank you for having me, Ben.
Thanks for coming on.
I've been a cook and a baker. Well, a cook first and foremost for about 13 years, and then started baking a few years ago. And 3 weeks ago, opened the bakery at Wakelyns.
Yeah,
So
it's super new.
yeah, this is the first time I'm sort of officially talking about it all. So bear with me a bit. But it's me and 2 other cooks and bakers at the moment, and we bake and cook using all of the produce grown in the crop and tree alleys at Wakelyns Organic Agroforestry in Fressingfield in Suffolk. And then I guess we're doing this to tell a story through our food, and that one first and foremost is that of the agroforestry and the diversity and resilience and productivity and beauty of this farming system. And any other ingredients that we source outside of the farm is traced back to healthy soil and people we know, and animals that we know are being looked after. And yeah, we just do it because we think that food that's grown and traded and cooked like this is good for us and our planet, and it's the most delicious and healthy and natural and best way for us to eat and produce food. So we want to just really, like I said, tell the story of agroforestry and sustainable food and farming through our food, and how beneficial small local food networks are.
Excellent. Charlie, up in Scotland.
So I'm a chef and I run the restaurant at the Free Company, as well as a mixed regenerative farm here. We actually kind of formed in 2017, pretty much out of necessity. We're based on a family dairy farm, and my brother and I were supposed to be the 4th generation of dairy farmers here. The farm actually shut in 2002 as a dairy, when we also had a beef herd and some pigs. But it was more of a conventional farm back then. Unfortunately, the farm, we weren't able to make it stack up. And for a period of time, there wasn't a huge amount of farming done on the farm. And then, my brother and I basically, my dad came to us and said, look, we're going to have to sell up the farm because I can't keep the banks away right now. And we said, look, let's we're going to set up the Free Company. We'd had a fair bit of experience from a few years previous where we'd run farm to table dinners traveling across the UK, which was in 2014 at the height of the dairy crisis. And that little project we did there was just to raise awareness for small scale local sustainable producers, and very much bridging the gap between producer and consumer by hosting dinners in farms. Yep. So in 2017, we managed to secure a lease from the farm, which kind of satisfied, it was a 10-year lease, satisfied the banks, and we set up the restaurant here. And that was kind of first and foremost. And there's a small plot at the front of the farm, which is kind of always been a little like derelict plot of land, and that's where we initially started the market garden. And initially we were growing all the produce for the restaurant right there. And then slightly more latterly, after a couple of good years of the restaurant, we upscaled up the size of our market garden from 1/4 of an acre to 6 acres.
Wow.
And that was at the start of last year, right in time for coronavirus to hit. So we'd never planned on selling any produce off the farm. Our aim was to always just, provide self-sufficiency for the restaurant. And obviously with, having gone from 1/4 acre to a 6 acre market garden, we then had quite a lot of surplus produce. And with not too much of an idea of what to do with it, other than the fact that the obvious solution was to try and get it out to people. So a silver lining of COVID, obviously the restaurant's been shut for the past year, but we've kind of now pivoted a fair bit and really kind of focused on regenerative farming. The restaurant will reopen a little later in the year, but for the past year up until now, we've been providing veg boxes from the farm wholesale to restaurants, farm shops, and incorporating a real mixed system into our regenerative practices, taking a fair bit of inspiration from the likes of Wakelyns with their agroforestry. And the first thing we did when we upscaled the market garden was planting 1,000 trees in hedgerows, and we're looking to take on a lease of another field and plant full length strips of woodland in and around a cover crop for our pigs. So
listeners, Henrietta is smiling a lot right now.
Yeah.
Just so you know. That's brilliant. And finally, Ethan, tell us about the Fitzroy and down in Cornwall and how you ended up there.
So I moved to Cornwall just over 2 years ago now, actually, from London. I've been working in London on my whole chefing career. Moved to Cornwall when I eventually got fed up of living in a city, which is for lots of reasons, but one of them is definitely like the lack of like direct connection to like food production and like food sourcing. The last restaurant I ran was actually in Borough Market, so like lots and lots of like close relationships with really good traders, which was obviously fantastic, but I still felt like a little bit too far away from like the real kind of like nitty gritty of like food production. I've always had a really close connection with Cornwall. My parents live down here as well, so it was kind of an obvious choice. And then I saw an advert for a job going at Fitzroy, as it was. And yeah, sort of everything else is sort of history really. We've got 2 restaurants in Foy now, actually, Fitzroy and North Street Kitchen, which I guess like when we kind of describe them, we say they've got a fish focus, but like that's kind of like slowly sort of developed a little bit in the last 12 months particularly. It's interesting, Charlie, bring up coronavirus actually, because that really spurred us on in what we were able to do. We started our little walled garden, which is just about just over half an acre, in November 2019. Again, it was like totally derelict, like a really like nice little project that we came through some friends basically who run a beef farm. We're like, oh, we've got a walled garden. Do you know anyone that wants to grow some veg? And we were like, absolutely, please can we do that? At the time it was like winter time in Cornwall, which is obviously very slow. It's probably the same, I guess, in Scotland, like it's a bit seasonal, kind of up and down. So we kind of like took advantage of the kind of quiet time of winter to sort of get cracking. But then the restaurants kind of started to pick up again, sort of like February half term onwards. And we're like, okay, how are we going to be able to balance being able to run a garden and also 2 restaurants? And it kind of became like a weird sort of balancing act where I kind of like run to the garden like my day off, then come to work and then run to the garden afterwards. And that sort of started to get like a bit like, I'm not going to be able to do as much as I want. How am I going to scale back my plans? Then everything shut. And I had 3 months basically to devote to turning what was even then like still quite a derelict space into like a productive food space, which obviously, coronavirus ruined lots of things, but from a purely selfish perspective, like running that garden, we wouldn't have been able to do it without the lockdown because we just wouldn't have had the time to devote to it. So that kind of like really kickstarted our project. It meant we could spend a bit more time, expand our original plan, and we're sort of reaping the benefits even now when we've, a year on, kind of able to still kind of keep things going because we managed to put like a significant number of hours in there, alongside now obviously running 2 restaurants.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about visions and planning. I remember when Ben Raskin came on the podcast last year, I think it was, back in a previous life. He was chefing and running a market garden at the same time, in this same sort of way. And I remember we were talking about that initial plan and your vision and where you're going. I'm just interested in your perspectives, and Ethan, perhaps we'll start with you, on I suppose, do you have a vision of what you want the produce that you want to use, or or the end product that you want on your plate? Is your focus more on plate, or is your focus more on produce, or both?
That's a really, really interesting question. I think it's kind of changed as time's gone on, to be honest. Like, we started off when we were trying to plan what to grow. We basically wrote like a long list of produce we wanted to use, because we had like dishes in mind that we wanted to use it for. And then as you obviously plan kind of how to grow things, how to farm things, how best they're going to grow and produce, you realize that it's not so isolated. If you're going to grow something, you should grow something else. And if you're going to grow that, then like this goes really well with it, or like to protect it from pests, you should plant this. And so we ended up with lots more kind of plants and produce that we didn't necessarily originally plan to grow. So the way in which we go about now, like planning our menus, is very much from like a farm direction. So we'll go in the morning, for example, and when things are growing, not so much right now, but we'll go in the morning and be like, okay, God, we've got tons and tons of courgettes. Like, I didn't realize they're gonna be ready so quickly. So looks like the menu for dinner is going to be different as a result of that. It's not so much like, okay, I'm going to go to the garden now and pick 5 kilos of courgettes because I know they're there. And it's very much like the kind of other way around, which for us was like a total kind of like shift in everything. You know, normally you just place an order, the food comes and you cook with it. This is like right back to the start of the supply chain, which again was kind of part of our sort of vision really for starting up the project. Like, it was like trying to develop more of a sort of direct connection to like food production, like more of an understanding, I guess, was sort of the idea. Like, I think you never really understand how food's produced or grown or processed until you do it yourself. Like, you have an idea. Like, I thought I had a pretty good idea. I was like, I spent, however many years chefing, talking to farmers, growers, and visiting them even. And so I thought I had an idea of what actually went on. And then I started doing it and it turned out I was completely wrong. So yeah, like that was all it was for really, was to just try and develop more of a connection. And then also just have like a bit, like Henrietta was saying, like more of like a localized kind of food chain really. And just, try and promote that kind of idea.
Yeah. Charlie, would you go along with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever we're sort of scoping out the season's growing plan ahead, a couple of years ago it was very much okay, like this is when the restaurant's going to be open, this is roughly what we hope to be harvesting at that time of year, and then it comes to it, and with the climate we have, trying to predict things like that's absolutely impossible. So it always turns out that it's completely farm driven, and no matter how many how intricately you want to plan dishes on the menu here changes pretty much every night. So yeah, I think we've pretty much given up with sort of planning the garden around the restaurant, and it's actually now the garden and the farm determine what's going to be on the plate each night as it comes. So no, I do agree with what Ethan's experienced as well.
Interesting. And Henrietta, the bakery as part of Wakelyns, what is the relationship of, I suppose, the bakery as part of the whole?
The bakery is definitely part of a much bigger project, which is the agroforestry farm. And I wouldn't, in my emails, like I said to you, Ben, I wouldn't say I'm a sort of grower, even though I have a direct sort of conversation with David Wolf, the farm owner, and Paul and Mark, the 2 contracted farmers.
Yep.
Obviously, we grow the YQ and the Q population wheats, which were bred here. But this year, as the bakery has started, I've wanted to bake with other grains as well. So this year we're growing naked barley and also Erlen's wheat. And we have a whole mixed alley of 6 different wheats. So we've got red lammas and purple paragon wheat and purple naked spelt and 3 others. Oak Farm population, which was a population bred by a guy called Ed Dickin in Shropshire that was very much inspired by Martin Wolf's work. And Cornovi, which is a mixture developed by Fred Price in Somerset.
Oh, okay. Yep.
One more,
Another
Edgar,
former
which is
guest of the show.
Yeah, Ed's great. Fred is great. Ed is great. They're both great.
Yeah,
But
they're both
yeah, I suppose to get more diversity on the farm, but also into the bakery and also into our stomachs. So that's sort of that part of it. But then we're also a community supported agriculture scheme has started on the farm as well. So when the two women who were setting it up, there's now 3 of them, but first of all it was just 2, I had a conversation with them about the produce they were going to grow and what they could grow for us in the bakery, because we've sort of bought their rent is 3 shares which will come to the bakery every week, and then any surplus vegetables they have that they can give us, they will. And then I guess very similar to Charlie and Ethan, we've just been realizing more and more. And I think when I started, because I sort of started last summer and helping with the harvesting of the fruit and everything, that because we're cooking so much with the seasons and what's around us, we're not really using recipes anymore. We're just, although you've got the base, like, your pastry recipe and you've got your bread formula and you might have your custard or whatever, you might then add fig leaves to the custard because that's what is growing on the farmhouse. And then right now we're still sort of getting to the end of this hunger gap, and we're using up a lot of the jams that we made last year because we haven't even got rhubarb really around us. So we're just making use of everything we've preserved. And I think lots of people might think that I think we've got so used to reading the supplement in whatever newspaper or getting a cookbook and thinking, oh, there's that aubergine curry, I want to cook that tonight, and I'll go to the supermarket and get everything. But so some people might automatically think, oh, if you're just cooking with what's around you, isn't that very difficult or limiting? But I think it actually brings much more creativity and diversity and sort of imagination, and that's what I think we're really getting from what we're doing here.
I know that a lot of listeners will be interested in, I suppose, the economics behind what you do, and it's difficult to pin this down because obviously there are other values behind providing directly. But in your view, does it make economic sense to do a soil to plate format? Who wants to start with that one?
Yeah, I economically, on like base value, is it cheaper to buy produce from elsewhere? Yes, it is. Is it cheaper to buy the same quality? You just can't guess it.
Yeah.
All of the produce that that's on display in the restaurant is harvested on the day that it's then consumed. And I think also we're fortunate that we're about 1,000 feet here. It's pretty cold all year round. Our veg grows pretty slowly, and as a result, I think this like slow growing form of veg, it tastes incredible. So I think there's that aspect. There's also there's the value in that traceability. We know exactly how it's grown. We know there are 0 synthetic fertilizers. There's no pesticides being used. There's no herbicides. We're no dig. Our aim year on year is to sequester as much carbon as possible by protecting the soil, and so there's a huge environmental value to the food we're growing, and we believe that we are regenerating the soil, and a few of our soil samples we've taken from this year to last year are showing that, which is amazing. So and then obviously there's the value of there's the educational value we have of being able to walk around with a whole group of diners and talk to them about what's being produced, what's in season, how we're growing specific things, and and that's definitely something that we're always wanting to. All farms hold knowledge that that should be shared, and the sort of disconnect between producers and consumers has been sort of widened over the industrialization of food, and by maintaining these and bridging these gaps, it's so important for to educate people about food and give people the opportunity to come and learn about the production of food, and what goes into it behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Henrietta, how does it work in relation to flour?
Well, the economics are pretty good because it's grown about 100 meters away from the bakery. So, that's good. And then we mill it on the farm as well. And then in terms of, because we're freshly milling it, so it's got the best nutrition and flavor as well. And otherwise, I mean, I've only ever really baked with the YQ. I haven't.
Yeah.
And always with whole grains. I think baking with whole grains is also incredibly important because a huge amount of grains in the sort of industrial commodity food system go to waste every year because we're milling so much white flour, which gets rid of the bran and the germ, which are in my opinion, the best bits of the grain because they're the most flavoursome and they have all of the goodness. So we are getting the biggest value out of the grain here.
And Ethan?
Yeah, no, I mean, agree with like most of what Charlie and Henrietta are saying. It's like, it's not, if you look at how many hours it takes to grow the produce you're growing versus like obviously like all the money that you put into growing that versus like buying from like a much larger scale producer, then like there's no contest. It's obviously much cheaper from people that grow on like a much bigger scale. But yeah, absolutely, there's other things than money that it provides. I guess the only thing I'd maybe like slightly disagree with, because obviously we have a slightly different perspective in that we do still buy produce from other people, is that I guess if as long as you are still sourcing from people that share the same values as you, you can still get like that fresh, high quality produce. And in some ways, like I always use this example, like we tried to grow tomatoes in our first year because I love tomatoes. Everyone loves tomatoes. They're delicious, especially when they're super fresh. Like really like organically grown tomatoes are one of the best things you can eat in the height of summer. But one of the things that we found is like we didn't have enough space. We didn't have enough man hours to really do them justice. So we ended up buying them from somebody else, and they were better than the ones that we were producing, hands down. They were just like, they had the time, the knowledge, the specialization to do it properly. And they were still growing them biodynamically. They were still like a super regenerative farm. Like it was a really lovely way that they were growing their tomatoes. We weren't doing ourselves, but we couldn't do it properly if we didn't get them from them. Basically, we had to find that kind of balance between the amount of man hours we had versus what we could do with it.
Yeah, this is going to be a slightly more difficult one to answer given lockdown, and also Henrietta, you're super new where you are. But in terms of customers, I'm interested in customer feedback that you've had on the way that you're working, and do you think that they're more engaged in what you're doing, knowing that you've had involvement in the whole process from soil to plate? Charlie?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think last year when the restaurant was open, and from the years prior to that, just speaking to people in the restaurant and people coming up to you at the end being like, I had no idea that beetroot grew in that way, and that beetroot even came from here, just insert name of vegetable, whatever it was. There's numerous people who said things like this, or I had no idea that you could graze pigs outside in Scotland. I've never barely ever seen a pig. And I think just sort of from those sorts of questions alone, it was clear that people had a real engagement. And then obviously, what became even more evident was when we shut down and at the start of the coronavirus and said we weren't going, the restaurant wasn't going to open for the foreseeable. We had so many people get in contact with us and be like, well, we've been to your restaurant multiple times, and we've seen the produce you're growing. How can we get our hands on that now? I think that there's definitely been such a you feel people with a little bit more knowledge and I guess you open their eyes to something that isn't in school curriculums, and you know, you don't have access to that sort of knowledge, you know, in a general day-to-day life, and people then, you know, are kind of enlightened, and they, you know, they take a huge interest, and yeah, I don't know, I think that the sort of the pandemic has almost like spurred it on further. This sort of you know, a greater desire to look after our, you know, mental and physical health, and you know, so much of that starts at, you know, what you're actually putting into your body. So yeah.
Henrietta, what feedback do you get from people who eat your produce?
They are really enjoying it. So we're actually doing, we're not sort of open like a normal bakery sort of with opening hours. We've been running in a subscription model, so people can sign up to 4 weeks and they get 1 loaf of bread a week, or they can have a taster pack, which is our Wakelyns tin loaf, and we do every week a surprise loaf, which is making use of, okay, stopping now, other things like last week we did, so it's a way of sort of telling a bit more of the story of the farm and the produce we have on the farm. So we might put plums that we dried last year into this surprise loaf, or prunes. And last week we did a foraged surprise loaf with nettles and dandelion leaves and garlic mustard and things. So this taster pack has half of the surprise loaf and then something sweet, like a Berlin sponge cake or a fruit tart or something, but also, yeah, using more of the produce from the farm. We've been getting really good feedback. I suppose it's a slightly different model of selling that than people have seen before, but because the farm is quite secluded, it's up a very, very long drive. We thought if we opened a long lane and then it goes into a drive. So we weren't sure if we opened like a more normal bakery, people would drive that far, basically. And it was also, as a small business just starting, it was a way of getting a bit more of a bit more income to start with, I suppose, because people are paying 4 weeks, so we get a bit more money to help us at the start. And it's also a way of the customer not just coming and buying 1 loaf and then maybe never coming back, but they're committing to 4 weeks and getting to know the farm a bit better and us and what we do. I also try and write a letter most weeks, just sort of giving the customers sort of farm updates and what we're growing or what's happening on the farm. Like last weekend we had an open agroforestry weekend with other agroforestry farms in Northumbria. So yeah, it's just a way of, I think it's allowing us a bit more engagement with them. But we did have this agroforestry weekend this weekend just gone, and people actually came to the farm and ate the food grown on the farm, processed on the farm, baked, cooked on the farm here. And it was really wonderful for them to experience that whole sort of closed loop here and eat, sort of visit the farm and then sit in the bakery and eat what they'd seen growing here.
Yeah, I was really hoping to get up last weekend. I was working on Saturday. It was, I couldn't get away. But yeah, either you, John, or George, or yeah, I think you all had great weekends. So that's really good.
Yeah, you're welcome any other time.
Oh, try and stop me. I'd love to come up. I will. You're literally just up the road. So let's just think about for any farmers, growers, or chefs listening, I suppose, who might be interested in doing more of what you're doing and bridging both sides. What advice would you give them, or perhaps what advice would you give yourselves before you were starting out? Who wants to start with that? Ethan?
Yeah, sure. I guess it's obviously been a massive learning curve. I think like the most important thing is just to acknowledge you're going to make loads of mistakes.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of went into it being like, if we get some produce at the end of this, then great. That's kind of our attitude. We're like, if we literally just do it as a hobby for 6 months and then decide it's not for us, then that's fine. We kind of did it on a really small budget. We decided to start quite small scale. And that, I think, kind of the best way of starting, just get stuck in and do it, and just acknowledge that some stuff's just not going to grow, no matter how much you try, no matter how much you will it, no matter how much you read up on it. You're going to put some stuff on the ground that's just going to fail. And that's just like, as long as you acknowledge that, you'll be happy in the end with what you get, as long as you get something, I suppose.
Charlie?
Yeah, definitely. Being satisfied with a bit of failure is definitely very useful. You need a good amount of optimism, especially when it rains for sort of 4 months straight in Scotland and you haven't seen the sun. But on a positive note, it does mean as a chef that you don't have to worry about forgetting to order something because you've got it growing outside. So you can always run out and grab it if it's actually grown. But yeah, doing a little bit of research. A few people that we took a lot of inspiration from were like Charles Dowding, Richard Perkins, Elliot Coleman. These sort of market gardeners. Who are like they have such incredible bits of advice in their books, and yeah, I mean, as Ethan says, there are some things that no matter how much reading you've done, it still won't grow anyway, and you might never find out why that is, but definitely still try it and get things in the ground, even if you think you're too late in the season. It might come to something, it might not, but it's definitely better having things in the ground than not. So yeah, I think a lot of people have sort of taken up some form of growing or gardening in some form over lockdown if they had any sort of outdoor space, and I think that it's pretty inspiring to see like that there's been such a such a movement towards people growing their own food, and I think that I'd hope that that's not just a quick trend, but it's actually gonna continue for some time. But no matter how small an area you have, definitely just try and get something growing. It's
Yeah, and Henrietta, one thing we've seen during COVID and lockdown has been an immense rise in the number of people home baking. What advice would you give to any bakers or budding bakers out there who are interested in diversifying what they're doing?
Do it. It's the best way of baking. Try and sort of seek out any local growers, farmers growing local grains or heritage grains near them. Try and get experience in bakeries doing those things. I think all of us who are sort of part of this movement are very open and generous and kind and wanting to share their knowledge, because that's the only way we can make any steps forward. So don't be afraid of contacting other growers or bakers or cooks to see if you can go and learn with them, because I think that's a really important part of it, is sharing our knowledge. And yeah, so do that. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Brilliant. And finally, you're obviously all doing it, but on the ground looking at others, do you see more people in future doing this kind of thing?
I think definitely people are, I know, a number of restaurants that are looking for small plots to, wherever it may be, even in, the center of cities, they're looking for some, small areas and plots to get some stuff growing for themselves. Both for, the sense that, they either can't get hold of a specific thing and they have a bit of knowledge of how to grow it, but also just for their own well-being. I think the service industry in the last year has realized the sort of break it's had, and the pause has made people think, we work in such an intense industry. It's pretty healthy to be able to take some time, get outside and do something slightly differently. So I think in that respect, chefs and restaurants are definitely gonna be looking for this type of get into growing a bit of their own food.
I agree. It's just so much more tasty.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Charlie said as well. I really hope that more people do continue doing this and continue doing it for a really long time. I think that would be hugely rewarding. I guess the challenge for like restaurants is obviously like margins in restaurants are, you know, historically very challenging. You know, was it like 1 in 2 businesses, like new restaurants close after the first 2 years or something stupid like that? I guess the challenge is therefore like, you know, we've discussed the economics of it in terms of like actual kind of like monetary value. I guess the challenge is trying to find a way to make financial sense in terms of growing alongside a restaurant, and, you know, being able to charge the money you need to charge for the food you're producing, people understanding why that happens. I think that's a huge part of like the continuation of this movement, is sort of, you know, a reconnection with like the value of food and how that kind of, you know, ties in with growing properly and what have you.
Well, we'll leave it there. That is all we have time for. But a massive thank you to my guests today, Henrietta Inman in Suffolk, Ethan Friskney-Bryer in Cornwall, and Charlie Buchanan-Smith up in Scotland. Next time, I'll be joined by Tom Hunt, George Young, and Barbara Bray to discuss the dietary shift for nature, climate, and health, and how we actually change diets. Big subjects with the Food Farming and Countryside Commission. So I hope you can join me then. But until then, have a great week.